What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Vincent, and I am a wedding and documentary photographer based out of Northwest Arkansas. But I have recently built up a little home studio, and I decided to go with constant light. So let's talk about why. Now, before we jump into why I chose constant lights, I want to preemptively say that I am no stranger to using off-camera flash. I use it all the time for my wedding work, as well as portraits on location. And in all honesty, if I had simply stuck with using flash in the studio, I wouldn't have had to buy probably a single piece of gear. As for the general setup of my space, I have one wall that has a simple gray curtain hanging up that I can use as a backdrop. And this curtain is totally inspired by some of the work by Phil Sharp. So you should definitely check out him. I will leave a link to him in the description. But from here, my main backdrop is a hand-painted drop from a company called Backdrops by Jeremy Ellsworth. I actually had him custom paint this one for me to give some like concrete wall type of vibes, and I absolutely love the way it turned out. From here, I'll talk more about the lights themselves later in the video, but for ease of use, I have them all on top of these rolling pistol grip stands from Cheetah Stand. It just makes it super easy to move all the lights around the space as well as accurately position everything. Then, because the space is small, I have two V-flats from V-Flat World. This is just to help control the light. I can use the white side to help fill in shadows when I need, or I can use the black side to help remove any unwanted fill light from nearby walls. And while this studio space isn't going to be a full-time shooting location for me, I wanted to build it out in a way that I could tackle most studio type jobs that I'd be willing to take in this type of space. For example, I feel like I could shoot any type of individual portrait or headshots, maybe even some small families, but for larger families or things like, sports teams, I just couldn't make that work in this small of a space. But for me, the primary use is going to be probably high school seniors, headshots, and kids. And for me, kids is the big reason why I went with constant lights over flash. One of the biggest headaches, at least for me, when working with children and off-camera flash is the time that it takes to pull the kids' attention away from all the things around them and get them to actually look at the camera, or even just look in a certain direction, because they walk into the studio and their eyes are jumping from light stands to softboxes to V-flats, and the list goes on. So you finally draw them away from the visual chaos and they look at your camera, and then pop goes the flash and they quickly revert their gaze back to the lights, and the process starts all over again. And this even happens with adults. I've been photographing a group before and then realized that one of the adults was almost like a deer in the headlights just looking at the flashing softbox. But with adults, it's at least easy to direct them and get them to do what you need them to do. But this process is already hard enough with children. It's even more difficult when you add in distractions that are almost custom designed to pull their attention away from it. But with constant lights, they're just on all the time. So yes, you still have that initial shock and awe as the subject enters the room, but after a little while, the lights tend to just kind of fade into the background noise of everything else. And not too long into the session, these lights are no different than just like a floor lamp in the corner of a living room. From here, I feel like constant lights have a small edge over flash because of their see what you get quality. The idea of being able to make finite adjustments when setting things up without having to take test images is really nice to have. You can visually see how shadows are falling on the subject's face. You can see if the light needs to go up an inch or down an inch. You can see if one light is too bright or not bright enough. And if you want to play with color, which I do, you can see how the different light colors are interacting with one another. Because of this, I chose to go with the Aputure 600C Pro as my main light. This light gives me a ton of power while also giving me endless color possibilities. It has more than 300 built-in gel options, as well as the ability to use HSI to set any color you want. And then it also has 600 watts of power, which I'll touch on this a bit later, but this amount has always been more than enough. Then for my second light, I have the Aputure Lightstorm 300X. This light is a bicolor light that can be adjustable from 2700K to 6500K. And I went with a 300X because it's enough power for any type of rim light, kicker light, while also being enough power to use as a main light if I'm using my 600C Pro to maybe fill in a scene with color. And the color adjustment on the 300X still gives me room to play with color even though it's not full RGB. And these two lights can give me a pretty good range and versatility, though I do think I'll need to add another light or possibly two. And for those, I have my eye set on the new Amaran 300C. While not as powerful as the 300X, I think having the full color ability would be really nice to have for some more creative work. There are also some headshot setups that I want to start doing that are going to require at least a couple more lights. And while it would be nice and ideal to have all of my lights be 600C Pro lights, that price range isn't really feasible given that this space isn't going to be in full-time use. Though if the studio part of my work sort of takes over, I do think that could be a possibility in the future. But this brings me to the power, and power is one of the main talking points when comparing flash to continuous lights. And I get it, you will never get enough bang for your buck in terms of power when comparing continuous lights to flash. It's just a matter of where the technology is. But with a studio space, I find that you don't really need a ton of power. You generally have total control over your space, so you can easily block out ambient light. And I prefer more shallow depth of field images anyways, and so I'm almost always shooting wide open apertures. And for reference, all the images you see as part of this video, I never once had my 600C Pro higher than about 75%. And then for the 300X, I never need this higher than about half power unless I'm using it with my Strobe Pro optical snoot attached. And that's simply because this specific modifier eats up a ton of power, and I'm pretty sure that the Aputure optical snoots have more specific designs to work with each light. So using one of those probably wouldn't cause as much light loss. So if you're looking to get one, I'd get one of the Aputure offerings that match the light you get. But from here, I want to touch on one more aspect of constant light that really puts this system over the edge for me, and that's the inspiration potential. I'm a very in-the-moment type of photographer where I don't like having a plan, and even if I do have a plan, I almost always prefer the images I take that are inspired by something in the moment. And using constant light gives me way more potential for this type of inspiration, because as the lights are on and you're adjusting things, you can see the way the lights play off of a piece of fabric or a subject's face. As you move the light, you can see how that light might interact with something. You can see it causing an interesting shadow or a highlight. You can then use this to gather an idea that you maybe never would have had in the first place. And it's an idea that you never would have had the chance to see with just a quick pop of a flash. Okay, so those are the main reasons I prefer constant lights over flash, especially in the studio environment. And this is ignoring the fact that they can also be used for video and content creation, such as this YouTube video. So if that's also something that you have on your list of things to do, constant lights might make even more sense to add to your arsenal of gear. But if you enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like and a comment. It really does help the video perform better as well as the channel. And while the majority of work I do is location-based, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more studio-based content from me, and make sure to give us a subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. Lastly, I'd love for you to follow along with me over on Instagram. There I share a lot of information about lighting, behind the scenes, and even editing. So with that, I'm out of here.